Christina, are you going to start or?
Are you going to wear that shirt?
No. But they're just starting with.
Well, now I want to see the shirt.
Are we on broadcast? It's 12:31. Let's get rolling.
Yes, just one moment. Hello, can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Wonderful. Good afternoon. My name is Christina Castro, and I am the liaison to the Board of Governors. Thank you for joining the California Community Colleges Board of Governors meeting. The meeting begins at 12:30 p.m., but we will wait a couple minutes as people continue to log in. In the meantime, in the meantime, to access the California Community Colleges Board of Governors meeting agenda, please visit our website, ccccco.edu, and go to the About Us tab and Board of Governors, then Meeting Schedule, Minutes, and Agenda, and select the blue agenda hyperlink to view the agenda on Board Docs. As a reminder, closed caption is available. Click the CC icon at the bottom of the screen labeled closed caption to read live captions. Members of the public wishing to comment on an agenda item or another topic within the jurisdiction of the Board of Governors will be given the opportunity to comment via Zoom by typing in the Q&A box or sending an email to boardcomments@cccco.edu. You can identify yourself or specify that you would like to make an anonymous comment. Your comment will be read out loud by a Chancellor's Office staff member. President Epstein, we are ready to begin.
Great, thank you very much. Welcome everyone, and we will start with the roll call.
I will now begin the roll call. Hildegard B. Aguinaldo.
Here.
Darius W. Anderson.
Here.
Amy M. Costa. Tom Epstein.
Here.
Felicia Escobar Carrillo.
Here.
Colin Fitzgerald.
Here.
Jolina M. Grande.
Here.
Pamela Haines.
Here.
Kevin J. Hall.
Here.
Kim Perigo.
Here.
Jennifer L. Perry.
Here.
Bill Rawlings.
Here.
Alma Salazar.
Here.
Valerie L. Shaw.
Here.
Blas Villalobos.
Here.
Okay, thank you. And
Board Member Costa, I'm here. I just didn't hit mute enough.
okay.
Thank you.
Since Board Member Perry is part of a controversial agenda item at this meeting, I think we'll call on her to lead the Pledge of Allegiance.
Unmute her.
Unmute her, please.
She's done. She's unmuted.
I'm here.
Okay.
I pledge allegiance
to the flag
Flag
of the United States of America,
and to the nation
Which is
stands
one name.
God.
under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to start with a uncommonly lengthy president's report, but there's been a lot has happened in the world since we last convened. And I did want to note right at the beginning that we're trying to make these meetings more like the in-person version, and we really hope to have the opportunity for live video comments at the September meeting. Until then, unfortunately, we'll need to have the public comments read by our moderators. So the world has changed since we last met in May. The coronavirus has accelerated throughout the country, with California among the hardest hit states, creating even greater challenges for our community colleges, our faculty, our staff, and our students. In addition, the George Floyd murder generated an uprising against police violence and racism that has brought new urgency and clarity, the need for transformational change in policies and attitudes towards race and equity in all aspects of life. Our board and staff recognize the need to respond to these events. With respect to COVID, the Chancellor has continued to exercise the emergency authority we granted him at our March meeting to assure the continuity of instruction for our students. The executive orders he has issued have helped colleges continue to serve students effectively during the crisis, and we will consider formalizing that authority further in today's meeting. Early in the crisis, the Chancellor's office worked diligently to help colleges make a rapid transition to online instruction. Through weekly webinars, daily updates, and direct communication, colleges were kept informed and provided guidance on best practices. At the same time, Chancellor Oakley advised colleges to prepare to offer online classes in the fall and directed his office to help colleges with their planning. As a result of the current conditions, it does appear that most districts will be fully or mostly online when classes resume. Importantly, we filed and won a federal lawsuit for a temporary injunction against the U.S. Department of Education rules denying CARES Act funds to undocumented and certain veteran and part-time students. I want to offer my congratulations to our General Counsel, Mark LaForestier, the Attorney General's office, and the colleges that joined this lawsuit for the great success that we achieved on behalf of our students. We trust that the colleges are distributing these funds expeditiously. We also joined another lawsuit that forced the Trump administration to back down on an effort to deny visas to international students who cannot take classes in person due to coronavirus restrictions in colleges. With regard to racial justice, the uprising gave new urgency to the equity agenda that we have been pursuing for several years. Our vision for success is grounded in the notion of equal opportunity and equal achievement for all of our students. Today, we are pleased to have a first reading of the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Regulations, reflecting the work done by our DEI task force during the past year. These regulations will formalize the system's unwavering commitment to equity in all aspects of operations. Kudos to Deputy Chancellor Gonzalez, the Academic Senate, and many others throughout the system who worked on this vital effort. And collaborating with our colleges and faculty, the Chancellor's office has already begun a review of law enforcement curriculum offered at community colleges to ensure that it addresses the concerns that have been raised in recent months. The Chancellor's office will also work with colleges on standards that should be followed by law enforcement personnel already employed at our colleges. In addition, we'll vote today on a resolution supporting Proposition 16, which would repeal the misguided initiative that banned affirmative action in California several decades ago. And finally, on tomorrow's agenda, we will examine what can be done to help disadvantaged students with the true cost of college attendance and continue to propose policies that give equal opportunities to students of color and others in need. In closing, I want to note that our board has concerns regarding the resignation of the interim chancellor of Peralta Community College District. This represents the third time in recent years that a chancellor has resigned over disagreements with the district's board of trustees. In light of Peralta's financial challenges, the Chancellor's office will remain actively involved in the effort to bring governance and financial stability to this important. And with that, I'll turn it over to Chancellor Oakley.
Thank you, Board President Epstein. Good afternoon to all the board members. Good to see everybody again virtually. I do have a couple of comments and welcomes and a few thank yous I need to make. First of all, again, welcome back to all the board members. I want to welcome our new Statewide Academic Senate President, Dr. Dolores Davidson. Very much look forward to working with her. She's no stranger to the Chancellor's Office team, so I think it'll be a very smooth transition in leadership in our working relationship, and I look forward to accomplishing many things on behalf of the system through her leadership. I also want to welcome new leadership at the student, the statewide student senate, the SSCCC. We have a couple of new leaders that have recently come on board. President of the SSCCC, Stephen Couture from Reedley College, and Vice President Catherine Squire from San Joaquin Delta College. We look forward to their energetic leadership of the SSCCC and look forward to continuing to work with that amazing organization that represents the largest student body in the country. We will be welcoming 2 new board members. At some point in the next few days, the governor's office will announce a couple of new appointments. At least that's what we are anticipating. We will welcome them once the governor has announced them and welcome them to our next board meeting. I also want to make note and welcome ahead of time one of the newest members to the Community College Chancellor's office. Linda Vasquez will become the Associate Vice Chancellor for Government Relations here in the Chancellor's office beginning August 1st. And while she's not here today to welcome, I did want to let the board know that you will see a new face when you come back in September. Many of you know Linda Vasquez. She's been working for the Campaign for College Opportunity for quite some time, doing some amazing advocacy work. And we are very thrilled to have her join the Chancellor's office team. And my final welcome is to our newest college, which will become our newest college at some point later in this agenda. So in advance of that, I do want to recognize the amazing work that the folks at the Madera Center at this point have done in preparing themselves to become the 116th California Community College, and thank their president, Angel Reina, for the amazing work that he and the entire team over there have done to prepare themselves for this day. I want to, as always, thank the faculty and the amazing classified staff and administrators for all that they have done to continue to push through this health crisis, now economic crisis, and all of the social unrest that we've been experiencing over the last several months. Our faculty and staff have performed heroically, and I want to just continue to publicly thank them for the amazing work that they're doing all across the state of California. I also want to encourage our students who I know are experiencing many, many challenges to continue to stay enrolled at our colleges. It's critically important that during this time of economic upheaval, that they stay enrolled at our colleges, complete their educational journey so that they can be secure in the workforce as this economic crisis and health crisis continues to unfold. I also want to thank, as Board President Epstein mentioned, the amazing work of our Attorney General, Javier Becerra, for continuing to remain steadfast in support of our students. And so I want to publicly thank him for his efforts. And of course, our General Counsel, Marcalif Forstier, and the entire team here at the Chancellor's office that have worked tirelessly to support the work in defending the rights of our students, and we will continue to do so. As Board President Epstein mentioned, the COVID crisis continues to unfold in some pretty dramatic and alarming ways. We were all hoping that the fall semester would allow us to begin to create some normalcy. Unfortunately, the way things are evolving, our colleges are preparing for the worst, as well as looking at college athletics and the whole host of things that we normally do in the fall semester, finding ways to either postpone or reimagine how we engage our students. So we will continue to work through this. We're anticipating that the governor's office will be issuing guidance to all of higher education in the next couple of days. As soon as that guidance is issued, of course, we will transmit it to the colleges and make sure that the Board of Governors is aware of the guidance that the governor's office will be issuing. And as Board President Epstein said, it is highly unlikely that the majority of our colleges will have in-person learning this fall. We're going to approach this county by county, and certainly there will be some counties where more in-person instruction can be accommodated, but by and large, the communities throughout California that are experiencing the surge in COVID-19 will have a significant impact on our ability to offer in-person instruction. And so we will continue to work with our higher education partners at CSU, UC, AICCU, and do everything possible to support our students in this moment of crisis. And then finally, as was, well, not finally, one other comment, a huge thank you ahead of the classified awards. As many of you know, tomorrow we will begin the meeting by awarding the 2020 Classified Employee of the Year Awards. We will have more to share tomorrow, but ahead of that, I just want to congratulate all the classified staff that are going to be recognized. Thank Board Member Rawlings for his support in helping us identify these amazing individuals. And again, take a moment to thank the classified staff of our system who just does amazing work day in and day out throughout this crisis. And my final word, I will echo the concern that is felt by Board President Epstein regarding the Peralta Community College District. There will be a number of letters sent in by both members of the Board of Trustees. There is a letter from the board chair, as well as several other board members. Those will be at part of the public comment section. We continue to be concerned, and while the board president of Peralta sent a letter, which you will read, expresses concerns about the behavior of the Chancellor's office, I think that this is a very unfortunate way to respond to what's happening in the Peralta Community College District. The Chancellor's office is here to support the Peralta Community College District, and to say anything other is quite disturbing to me and my team. We are here to support the board, the administration, the classified staff, and most importantly, the students of the Peralta Community College District. There is mention in some of the letters that the Peralta Community College District is the one that reached out to the Chancellor's office for help. And I just want to correct the record that it was my office that reached out to then Chancellor Adhere to express concerns about their fiscal stability. And we have been doing nothing but supporting that district ever since I reached out to then Chancellor Joel Adhere. As Board President Epstein mentioned, Chancellor Regina Steinbeck-Strout is the third chancellor now that has expressed concerns about the governance of the Peralta Community College District Board. We have to take those concerns very seriously. And so I will be working with the Chancellor's office team, the General Counsel, to determine what are the next steps for the Chancellor's office in regard to the situation that's evolving at the Peralta Community College District. I will have a recommendation to Board President Epstein and Vice President Pamela Haines soon. At this point, I am contacting all the members of the legislature that represent the district. I will have a conversation with Oakland Mayor Libby Schaaf as well. And I've also been in contact with the governor's office. Together, all those individuals will help inform our next steps. And just to be clear, our next steps will not be to create conflict with the Peralta Community College District Board. Our next steps will be to support the students of the Peralta Community College District Board. And that is the role that we will take, and we will not engage in any back and forth with the leadership of the Peralta Community College District. So that concludes my remarks, and I look forward to the rest of the board meeting.
Thank you. So next up is the consent calendar, which has a robust amount of items. just the board meeting minutes from May 18th and 19th. Do we have a motion to approve the consent calendar?
So moved.
Second.
Second, Aguinaldo. Okay, anyone have any comments? Are there any public comments?
There are no public comments at this. There are no public comments at this time. Apologies.
Okay, thanks. Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, the consent calendar is approved. On to the action calendar, the conflict of interest code amendments.
Board President Epstein, do you want to move on with the items, or will we break for closed session at this point?
We can break for closed session. That wasn't on the agenda that I'm looking at here on board docs. But if it's the will of the board to go into closed session at the moment, we can do that.
Yes, it's at the top of the order of the agenda, but certainly the board can take closed session at any point in time.
Okay, we can go into closed session now. I'd prefer in the future that it be indicated as such on the public board docs agenda at the time we're going to do it. But we will now convene in closed session.
The Board of Governors has adjourned to closed session and will return around 2:00 p.m. Welcome back. We may resume the meeting.
Okay, do we have a quorum of the boards signed in? Looks like we do. Okay, welcome back, everyone. For those of you in the public who are following us, I apologize that the closed session was held out of order, and you may have planned your day around this, and I apologize if that affected you. We'll try and make sure that doesn't happen again. And we also need to go back and have a roll call vote on the consent calendar. I forgot that we usually don't have a roll call vote because we're on Zoom. We do need to do a roll call vote. So I'd like to go back. We had our motion and second, and let's do a roll call vote on the consent calendar.
Certainly. Hildegard B. Aguinaldo.
Aye.
Darius W. Anderson. Amy M. Costa.
Aye.
Tom Epstein.
Aye.
Felicia Escobar Carrillo.
Aye.
Cullum Fitzgerald.
Aye.
Jolena M. Grande.
Aye.
Pamela Haines.
Aye.
Kevin J. Hall.
Aye.
Kim Perigo.
Aye.
Jennifer L. Perry.
Aye.
Bill Rawlings.
Aye.
Alma Salazar.
Aye.
Valerie L. Shaw.
Aye.
Blas Villalobos.
Aye.
Okay, great. Now we're going to pick up the agenda, the action calendar, second reading on the conflict of interest code amendments.
Thank you, President Epstein and Vice President Haines. I have with me today Deputy Counsel Fermin Villegas, who prepared this item and did all the work on it, so he's going to present today. Fermin?
Okay, thank you very much, Mark. President Epstein, Vice President Haines, and members of the board, good afternoon. Item 3.1 is an action item to adopt the conflict of interest code amendments that were presented for a first reading at the Board of Governors meeting in May. As previously explained at that meeting, the Political Reform Act requires every state agency to enact a conflict of interest code that identifies all agency officials and employees who make or participate in the making of governmental decisions. The agency's conflict of interest code should reflect the current structure of the agency and identify the officials and employees who must file statements of economic interests and the disclosure categories applicable to each. In order to ensure that a conflict of interest code remains current, the Political Reform Act also requires that every 2 years during odd-numbered years, state agencies review their conflict of interest code and determine whether changed circumstances require any amendments. In 2019, the Office of General Counsel and the Internal Operations Division conducted a comprehensive review of the agency's conflict of interest code. We found that it required amending due to an internal organizational restructuring and the elimination and addition of a number of positions. After securing FPPC approval of the proposed amendments, we presented these to the Board of Governors for a first reading at the May 2020 meeting. This being the second reading, these proposed amendments are now before the board for adoption. It is the recommendation of the Office of General Counsel that the board adopt the proposed amendments as set forth in the attached resolution. And with that, I'll turn it back over to President Epstein, subject to any questions any members may have. Thank you.
Thanks. Any comments or questions from the board? Any comments from the public?
The public comment period for item 3.1 is now open. Please submit your comments through the Q&A feature of the Zoom platform and include the item number in your submission. You can either identify yourself or specify that you would like to remain anonymous in your comment. Your comment will then be read out loud by a Chancellor's Office staff member. I have not received any comments through the Q&A quite yet, but I suggest to provide about 10 seconds for anyone to finish typing their question.
I have not received any public comment via email at this time.
Okay, thanks. We'll wait a few seconds. Okay, so we'll take a motion on item 3.1.
I'll move.
Second.
Second.
So that's Perry and Fitzgerald. Okay, please. I just saw a Q&A pop up. Is it for this one? Okay, no. I'll come back to that in a second. Okay, so please call the roll.
Hildegard B. Aguinaldo.
Aye.
Darius W. Anderson. Amy M.
Yes.
Perfect. Amy M. Costa.
Aye.
Tom Epstein.
Aye.
Delicia Escobar Carrillo.
Aye.
Cullum Fitzgerald.
Aye.
Jolena M. Grande.
Aye.
Pamela Haines.
Aye.
Kevin J. Hall. Kim Perigo.
Aye.
Jennifer L. Perry.
Aye.
Bill Rawlings.
Aye.
Alma Salazar.
Aye.
Valerie L. Shaw.
Aye.
Las Villalobos.
Aye.
Okay, thanks. The motion carries. We got a Q&A here that I asking if there was a report out from the closed session, and we considered legislation but took no action, and there was a discussion of the performance of the Chancellor that also took no action. So that's the report.
President Epstein, it was, I think you said legislation. If I heard correctly, you meant litigation.
I meant litigation. I'm sorry. Yeah. Okay. With that done, let's move to item 3.2, the Title V standing order related to Student Senate for the California Community Colleges.
Thank you. So this item seeks approval by the board of both an amendment to Title V and an amendment to the standing orders that govern the Board of Governors and the Chancellor's Office relationship with the Student Senate. These changes were prompted in part by the passage of Assembly Bill 1504, which establishes a reliable funding stream for the Student Senate to establish a greater level of financial independence from the Chancellor's Office. We presented these items to you on first reading and also have described the memorandum of understanding that was executed between the Chancellor's office and the Student Senate to the board in our last meeting. And we are requesting that the resolution be approved today, promulgating the changes to the standing orders and Title V. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to address them.
Any questions or comments on the board?
I have just a quick board comment, President Epstein. I would, thank you. You know, the Student Senate is probably the most unique student organization in the state of California, and definitely a serious contender for that title worldwide. I mean, in a nutshell, students from colleges elect representatives at their local ASOs, and then those students elected nominate a delegate to represent them at the regional level. Those delegates meet and elect regional board members, and those regional board members make up the board of directors. And what makes that structure unique, of course, is how little influence this structure allows from outside entities. I mean, this is an organization that derives its authority from the students of the California Community Colleges because it is the students of the California Community College. And its policies and advocacies come straight from the mouths of students. Its events are planned by the students. Its vision is steered by generations of student leaders who are trained in the Senate and motivated to lead it. So when I see, you know, items like this come up on the board, and having served in the Student Senate, and you know, I am extremely pleased, and I'm really looking forward to seeing how this enfranchisement, this form of recognition, solidifies the organization as a central part of our system. I'm really excited to see the new round of executives for the SSCCC, including President Kodur, lead the great voices he commends on the board of directors to really work with him as well to fight for the student agenda this upcoming year. So that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other board comments? Any comments?
This is Hildy.
Oh, go ahead.
I just wanted to express my personal appreciation for Colum in pushing this forward. Certainly a superhero in my eyes, and I think this is long overdue and fantastic to watch. So thank you for being such a great advocate for the students.
Thanks. So now we're open for public comment. Have we received any public comments?
Public comment period for item 3.2 is now open. Please submit your comments to the Q&A feature of the Zoom platform and include the item number in your submission. You can either identify yourself or specify that you would like to remain anonymous in your comment. Your comment will then be read out loud by a Chancellor's Office staff member. I have not received any comments through the Q&A just yet, but it would be a good idea to stand by for 10-15 seconds in case anyone needs to finish typing.
President Epstein, I have not received any public comment for item 3.2 via email at this time.
Okay, thanks. And for those of you in the public who do wish to comment on a future item, you may submit those comments earlier, and we will have them ready to go when the item comes up. So not hearing any other public comments, we will take a motion on this. Member Fitzgerald, maybe you might want to do that.
Thank you. Yes, so moved.
I'll second.
I think Rawlings got in under the wire there, so for the second. Okay, please call the roll.
Hildegard B. Aguinaldo.
Aye.
Darius W. Anderson.
Yes.
Amy M. Costa.
An enthusiastic aye.
Tom Epstein.
Aye.
Felicia Escobar Carrillo.
Aye.
Colum Fitzgerald.
Aye.
Jolena M. Grande.
Aye.
Pamela Haines.
An enthusiastic aye.
Kevin J. Hall. Kim Perigo.
Yes.
Jennifer L. Perry.
Aye.
Bill Rawlings.
Aye.
Alma Salazar.
Aye.
Valerie L. Shaw.
Aye.
Blas Villalobos.
Aye.
Okay, the motion carries.
Thank you, everyone.
So now we're on to probably the most controversial item we've had here in many years. This is the reappointment of Jennifer Perry to the board of the Foundation for California Community Colleges. And having known Jennifer for quite some time, I'm rooting for her, but I'm a little concerned about what the outcome might be. But with that, I think we'll turn it over to whoever is presenting the item.
Hi, thank you, President Epstein, Vice President Haines. This is Keitha Mills. I'm President and CEO for the Foundation for California Community Colleges. Member Perry has served as one of two of Board of Governors representatives on the Foundation board and is concluding her first of 3 available 4-year terms on our board. And I want to start by acknowledging both Member Perry and Member Anderson for their many, many contributions as Foundation board members. But today I want to focus primarily on Member Perry as she completes her first 4-year term of service. So over the past 4 years, Member Perry has been just a tremendous advocate for the Foundation and helping us make connections to funders and potential partners, especially as it relates to her personal passion, which is our services supporting former foster youth. She's done a great job helping us stay aligned and connected to Board of Governors priorities, and also helping to share our successes and provide those connection points about how the work of the Foundation actually does work to support Board of Governors priorities. She's not only generously lended her time and expertise to the Foundation, but she's also been a major donor and has participated in each of the Foundation's individual giving campaigns, including our current COVID-19 relief and recovery campaign. And I would not be doing my job if I didn't encourage all of you to join Member Perry, Member Anderson, President Epstein, and Chancellor Oakley in considering a donation to our current COVID-19 relief and recovery efforts. Those efforts are providing direct financial support to our students. And if you haven't already done so, there is still time to give. So I would encourage you all. And I think most of all, both for me personally and professionally, I have so appreciated Member Perry's willingness to provide me with really helpful advice and guidance and encouragement on a variety of topics and a few sticky situations where really her mentorship and her leadership have been invaluable for me as the CEO of the Foundation, but also for the Foundation as a whole in helping us achieve our collective goals. So with that, we're recommending that the Board of Governors reappoint Member Perry for a second 4-year term on the Board of Directors of the Foundation for California Community Colleges.
Thank you, Keitha. Member Perry, do you want to defend yourself before the onslaught of attacks?
Yes. Thank you, Keitha, and President Epstein. I know where you live. I just want to say, per our discussion earlier, we are lucky. Leadership is what matters. So the leadership of the Foundation is what makes everything happen. We have, and it's been wonderful in my tenure on the board to watch how the relationship between the colleges and the Foundation has grown and been nurtured and become so much more fruitful. Each entity is working much more hand in hand to the benefit of both. And that goes to both the Chancellor's leadership and Keitha's leadership. I think she's one of the top CEOs I've ever worked with in terms of her vision, her exactitude, her ability to put together a stellar team. So any of my contributions are really just a reflection off of the day-to-day and real work that Keitha does. So it's been an honor, and I'm more than happy to continue to do the work that is such great work that supports the vision of the community colleges. So I am hoping that you will have the fortitude to ignore President Epstein on this particular issue. Perhaps we can gavel him out at this particular juncture and enable me to continue this work. And I want to echo Keitha's comments, encouraging you all to give to that fund, because the students, to say they are suffering is an understatement. The lack of basic supports and basic items that these students are suffering from is monumental. So anything you do, big, small, really helps, because they need the essentials in order to continue their learning. So thank you in advance for doing that.
Tom.
Thank you, Member Anderson. You're next. I can't wait for your renomination.
Well, I just want to say I would like to, after the comments, I'd like to move. Member Perry has done an amazing job. She is a great mentor to new members on the foundation and gives, as Keith points out, really great advice and direction about the important role that the foundation plays. And I think for all of us that have contributed and those that haven't, it's an important tool, and we heard about it in our earlier call on the online college, that the foundation does across the board. So I enthusiastically support Member Perry, and I'm really honored to serve with her.
Second.
Thanks, Darius.
All right. Are there any other comments?
Well, just per normal, we should really ignore our board president, you guys.
Yeah, it happens way too often.
Can we move that? Can I get a second?
Wait, you won't have me much longer to kick around. That's okay.
I second it.
Okay, but first we need to offer public.
Darius just did.
No, public comment.
Oh, okay.
The public comment period for item 3.3 is now open. Please submit your comments through the Q&A feature of the Zoom platform and include the item number in your submission. You can either identify yourself or specify that you'd like to remain anonymous in your comment, and it'll then be read out loud by a Chancellor's Office staff member. I have received one public comment so far, and I'll read it now. My name is Jeffrey Baum, and I am a former board colleague and now commenting a member of the public. And as a personal donor to the foundation, I wholeheartedly support this nomination and join the call for increased philanthropic support for California community colleges. She is an exceptional colleague, board member, and leader. And that is the only public comment that I have received so far.
President Epstein, I have not received public comment via email for item 3.3.
Okay, we'll wait a few seconds here. See if anyone else. Thank you, former board president Baum, for staying in touch. Okay, hearing no other comments, before we do have the vote though, I do want to observe that Member Perry also has the most dramatic art as a backdrop for her Zoom screen of anyone and any meeting I've been on since this whole thing began, and that is certainly noteworthy.
Thanks.
So with that, we'll call the roll.
Hildegard B. Aguinaldo.
Yes, exclamation mark.
Darius W. Anderson. I'll come back to him. Amy M. Costa.
Absolutely, yes.
Tom Epstein.
A very enthusiastic yes.
Felicia Escobar Carrillo.
Also a very enthusiastic yes.
Colin Fitzgerald.
You had me at the art, so yes.
Jolena M. Grande.
Yes.
Haines.
Absolutely yes.
Kevin J. Hall. Kim Perigo.
Yes.
Jennifer L. Perry.
Do I get to vote on myself? I do?
Of course.
I guess so.
Jill Rawlings.
Yes.
Alma Salazar.
Absolutely yes.
Valerie L. Shaw.
Yes.
Blas Villalobos.
Yes.
I'll try one more time. Darius Anderson. Okay, thank you. Did we get a first and second on this?
Yeah, it was
Shaw.
it was Darius and Valerie.
Thank you.
Okay, glad that's over.
And I just
Moving on to
thank you to everyone. The support means a lot, and I'm happy to continue doing this, and hopefully we'll be able to do more and better things in the next 4 years. And also, had I realized this vote was coming up, I would have put on lipstick, so sorry about that.
Me too. Okay, item 3.4, recognition of the status of Madera Community College.
Good afternoon, members of the board. Thank you, President Epstein, for this opportunity. My name is Lizette Navarrete, Vice Chancellor for College Finance and Facilities Planning. And I have the honor today of bringing this next item, which is a recognition of a community college center that has been working diligently with extensive and passionate leadership to serve students of California. This item is an action item and presents to you the opportunity to welcome Madera Community College as the 116th college in our great system. So let me tell you a little bit more. And I do have with me President Reina, who is the founding president of Madera Community College. Madera Community College began as a center of the State Center Community College District and has transitioned to serve on an underrepresented population in the state of California. Its primary mission is to serve students through guided pathways and be responsive to the every need of students by providing clear direction and embracing their role in serving underserved and underrecognized opportunities. They've done an extensive work beginning in October 2019 when they completed through the ACCJC and comprehensive external analysis and visitation that really marked the start of their journey to a full college. In May, they received approval for the changes from Madera Community College Center to Madera Community College, and now are committed to both the student success and achieving the goals and the vision for success. So with that, I want to introduce to you President Reina, who is the founding president of Madera Community College.
Thank you, Vice Chancellor Navarrete. I appreciate it. I appreciate the Board of Governors allowing me to be present today. It's an honor to be here. It's an honor to represent Madera Community College. I'm originally from the state of Washington, but I arrived hitting the ground running, as you can imagine, because part of the accreditation process is a president needed to be hired. So the reason I mentioned that I'm from the state of Washington is because I needed to get familiar with the new commission. And there was a lot of research, a lot of learning, a lot of collaboration, a lot of support. And to that end, I want to thank Chancellor Oakley, Deputy Chancellor Daisy Gonzalez, and Vice Chancellor Navarrete, and the whole State Chancellor team, because without them, we wouldn't be where we're at today. And I appreciate their support and leadership as I've navigated not only ACCJC, but also the California state system. And as you're probably aware, there's a lot of behind the scenes work that took place and is taking place. And I'd also like to thank my district chancellor, Dr. Paul Parnell, for his infinite wisdom in hiring me to begin with. And also just for his support. You know, he's been very supportive since day one. He has treated me like a college president, has allowed me to make the decisions as a college president, which made things easier as I've been working with faculty, staff, and students, and my colleagues in State Center Community College District. I'd also like to thank our Board of Trustees for all their support, because without them, we wouldn't be able to get things approved and move forward for accreditation purposes, but also to be here today. And then I'd like to thank Dr. Jerry Buckley, the Reedley College president. We both started at the exact same time, and Reedley College is the college that we are moving away from to become our own independent college. So without their leadership and collaboration, this wouldn't have been possible as well. And I'd like to thank Vice President Gohar Bomjan, because without her guidance and leadership, we wouldn't be here today as well. And more importantly, I'd like to thank our faculty, staff, and students and administrators, because they did all of this hard work that Vice Chancellor Navarrete mentioned. And as you can see, it takes a village to get here. It wasn't done by myself. It wasn't done just by faculty, staff, and students. We had community involvement. We had the State Chancellor's office involvement. We had ACCJC involvement. So I've appreciated all the support and leadership. I just want to list a couple or a few things that we've accomplished. So 2 years ago, in July of 2018, the needs assessment was submitted to the State Chancellor's office. And then March of 2019, it was approved. And then we moved on to the next phases. I arrived May of 2019, and we developed a mission, vision, and values collectively. We also developed our educational master plan. We developed an organizational structure that was developed around the vision for success, where we centered equity in the work that we do. And so there's been a lot of work and intentional work to support the vision for success and support guided pathways at Madera Community College. And this has meant a lot to our community. When I arrived, every meeting that I would go to, they'd ask me, what's the status? Where are you at? How's it going? So I know our community is ecstatic. Last week, the Board of Supervisors had a proclamation on our behalf because of today and your decision that's pending. Our City Council did the exact same thing. So I'm so thankful and appreciative of our faculty, staff, and students for their hard work, their collective effort. And lastly, you know, the best thing about today for us and for me is that our students are the real winners today. So I thank you for that. And it's in alignment with your mission and vision of simply putting students first. So thank you for this opportunity to speak before you today.
Thank you, President Reina. Members of the board, in your item, you have several materials for additional background, should you have any questions. One last note is that the ACCJC provided an initial accreditation to Madera Community College in June, and a copy of that report is available there. So with that, I will turn it back over to President Epstein for consideration of Madera Community College and the Cougars decide. So thank you very much, and thank you, President Reina, for all of your efforts and those of your college.
Yes, thank you very much, President Reina. Do we have any board comments or questions? Hearing none, do we have any public comments?
Yes, the public comment period for item 3.4 is now open. Please submit your comments through the Q&A feature of the Zoom platform and include the item number in your submission. You can either identify yourself or specify that you would like to remain anonymous, and your comments will then be read out loud by Chancellor's Office staff member. So far, I have received at least one comment on this item, and I'll read it now. On behalf of the CCLC CEO Board, I would like to welcome the newest college to our system, Jill Weiss, Superintendent and President of Shasta College. And I do have one more comment, which I will read now. On behalf of the league boards and staff, a hearty congratulations to the State Center CCD Board of Trustees, President Reina, and the faculty, staff, and students of Madera Community College. We look forward to working with you in the years to come. Larry Delizio, President and CEO, Community College League of California. An additional comment here, the community of Madera is very grateful for your support. And next comment, my name is Stephen Coder, and I am the president of the SSCCC and also former student trustee of the State Center Community College District. I have had the amazing privilege of working with President Reina and his staff. He has exhibited exemplary leadership and persistence in the process of accreditation. We, as Reedley College Tigers, are excited to see the Mountain Lions take this momentous step. Go Madera, number 116. And next comment, I will go ahead and read it now, from Debbie Bray, President and CEO, Madera Chamber of Commerce. Thank you for this consideration of this exciting recognition. For many years, we have looked forward to this designation. Thank you from the Chamber and our community. Madera County is behind the campus, students, and staff. And the final comment that I have, I will read it now. On behalf of the Academic Senate for California Community Colleges, congratulations to Madera College. And those are all the comments that I have received through Q&A on this item.
I have not received any public comments for item 3.4 via email at this time.
Okay, and while we wait to see if there are any other public comments, I believe member Escobar Carrillo has a comment.
Sure, thanks very much. I just wanted to also congratulate President Reina and say that I'm excited to see, as someone who does work in my day job in the Central Valley, it's exciting to see another campus that's going to be able to serve students in a more robust way with this designation. I know that not all counties in the Central Valley and San Joaquin Valley are treated equally in terms of resources, and to sort of see a county like Madera get this community college designation, I think is really wonderful. And you know, I think we all look forward to, and I personally look forward to hearing about the progress of the community college as you all move forward. So congratulations.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other public comments that have come in?
There have been no additional public comments received.
Okay.
President Epstein, I did receive a comment on my email that I'll just quickly read. It's from Sandra Caldwell. Sandra Caldwell is the former president of Reedley College. She now heads the state community colleges for the state of Wyoming, and she just wanted to go on record as supporting this action today as from her former role in the development of the center in Madera. So I just wanted to make sure and put her comments on the record.
Okay, great, thank you. So now we'll take a motion.
I'll move to approve.
So, so that's Salazar and Fitzgerald, I believe. Okay, let's call the roll.
Hildegard B. Aguinaldo.
Aye.
Darius W. Anderson.
Yes.
Amy M. Costa.
Aye.
Tom Epstein.
Aye.
Felicia Escobar Carrillo.
Aye.
Cullum Fitzgerald.
Aye.
Jolena M. Grande.
Aye.
Pamela Haines.
Aye.
Kevin J. Hall. Kim Perigo.
Aye.
Jennifer L. Perry.
Aye.
Phil Rawlings.
Aye.
Alma Salazar.
Aye.
Valerie L. Shaw.
Aye.
Las Villalobos.
Aye.
Well, great, congratulations, President Reina. You are now the president of the 116th California Community College. Welcome.
Hey, Tom, now can we clarify, is it a cougar or a mountain lion? I want to know who I'm rooting for now.
It's a mountain lion.
Mountain lion, okay, good. All right, thank you very much. And we're on to the next action item, item 3.5, the resolution supporting Prop 16.
Thank you. Good afternoon, board members. This is David O'Brien, Vice Chancellor for Governmental Relations. Very good to be with you. Item 3.5, as President Epstein mentioned, is a resolution endorsing Proposition 16 on the upcoming November general election ballot. And this is a measure that was placed by the legislature as Assembly Constitutional Amendment 5, which would repeal Proposition 209 of 1996. President Epstein, you referenced it earlier. Probably not a lot of need to go into much background here. In terms of the difference between endorsing the ballot measure and the bill, this board took a vote of support on ACA 5 by Assemblymember Shirley Weber, which placed Prop 16 on the ballot. And just want to clarify, there is some clarifying language in the background section of the item here that specifies that it is a little bit different when a public board, such as the Board of Governors, endorses a ballot measure versus a piece of legislation. So there has been case law on this because the questions come up about the propriety of a public board endorsing a state ballot measure that will be before the voters. And there's been case law on this that essentially determined that as long as it does happen at an open public meeting where members of the public are allowed an opportunity to express their views on it, and as long as it's understood that it's not the Chancellor's office as a state agency, but the individual board in your capacity as individual members of the board taking this decision, then it is entirely appropriate and has been ruled appropriate in the past. And most recently, of course, the Board of Governors took a vote to support the recent bond measure, Proposition 13, on the March ballot for K through 12 and higher education. So the resolution is before you. It is very similar to the language that was used in the draft resolution the Chancellor's office prepared and that we know many of our local community college boards of trustees adopted in favor of ACA 5. Specifically, however, we have added language in this item specifying, I should say, calling out in particular, the link between Proposition 16 and the repeal of Prop 209 and 3 recent efforts undertaken by the Chancellor's office and strongly supported by this Board of Governors. The first is our Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Task Force, which found that the goal of reducing racial and gender gaps among the faculty and staff at our community colleges would almost certainly have a positive impact on student learning outcomes, considering that the majority of California community college students are students of color. The second piece that is called out here is the Black and African American Advisory Panel that the Chancellor's office convened that made specific recommendations for improving educational attainment for our Black and African American students by not just hiring, of course, a more diverse staff and faculty, but targeted outreach and support services that, was limited by Proposition 209's restriction on the use of race as even one of many factors in public educational services. And then finally, the third piece called out in this resolution is the statewide call to action that the Chancellor and the Board of Governors issued last month following the murder of George Floyd and other nationwide and worldwide unrest regarding systemic racism in the criminal justice system as well as throughout society. So those 3 pieces in drafting this we viewed as the link to Proposition 16 and the Vision for Success, which of course calls for reducing equity gaps in race, gender, and other areas. And just want to point out for you as you consider this resolution, there's probably only so much I'm supposed to act as though I'm attempting to influence or make a recommendation, but just do want to point out that in my capacity as your Vice Chancellor for Governmental Relations, it's been relayed to me by many stakeholders and many staff to the state legislature that this board, it did not go unnoticed, that this board was the first higher education board in California to endorse ACA 5 in May, and that the strong advocacy by community college leaders such as yourselves, our partners in the field, our associations, and our students was, it's almost universally agreed that that was a decisive factor in helping ACA 5 pass the legislature with more than the required number of votes than it did. So just want to thank you for your leadership on this, and you have the resolution before you, and I'm happy to answer any questions you might have on it.
Thank you, Vice Chancellor O'Brien. Board member comments.
President Epstein?
Yes.
I would be, foolish to not say that, coming from the most diverse city in the country, Stockton, California, I am really happy that we're considering the adoption of this resolution and our support of this action, because I know that it's of utmost importance for the American dream, for the social mobility aspect of the American dream, that we uphold our end of the bargain to our most disenfranchised communities. I know the vote's coming, but I enthusiastically support this, and I'm really looking forward to the vote.
Member Costa.
Yeah, I absolutely support this. I'd like to offer perhaps a technical amendment to the resolution, though. David, you did a good job of kind of outlining the practical impact for our system, which would be, I think, both in hiring as well as student outreach. The resolution references contracting, but I think we can go a step further because I believe that getting rid of some of the restrictions of 209 in our contracting and allowing it to be used in the contract services that support students and our faculty is also important. We've had a lot of different conversations about making sure that the communities that we are trying to impact are seeing people that look like them and have the same shared experience. And so I just think in the resolution, we should make it a little bit clearer that you know, our contracting practices would be more inclusive if this were to pass by voters.
Tom?
Yeah, before we leave, Amy, did you have a specific word change you'd like to make in the resolution?
Hold on, let me toggle over there. I found it. It's on the second page of the resolution. It is the second whereas, where we reference, whereas California is one of only 8 states that do not allow race or gender to be considered in hiring or allocating state contracts or accepting students into the state's public colleges and universities in order to remedy the effects of generations of discrimination. I thought we had a more specific one on contracting. I mean, I think what I would, I don't want to get too technical. I mean, it really should be its own whereas, which is whereas California is one of only 8 states that do not allow race or gender to be considered in allocating, in this case, I think it's not even state contracts. It's, although I guess we qualify as a state contract, in allocating state contracts, the repeal would allow us to award contracts to a more diverse and inclusive group of contractors, something along those lines.
Okay, we'll come back to that when somebody makes a motion. Okay, Member Anderson?
Yeah, I would like to shout out because the author, and you know, early in my political career, I fought against the politics of hatred and division that Ward Connerly brought forward in this original proposition. It's been long overdue, and I think the great work that Assemblyman Weber has done on this is something that we should wholeheartedly, it's great for our system, for our contractors, our students, everyone, but it's also great for the state of California, and it should happen a long time ago. So I enthusiastically support our position.
Any other board comments?
I'd like to add in on the previous few comments. You know, one of the things I've seen at the local level has been how much effort goes into completely sterilizing the process that we use for contracting, hiring, what have you, and how that does not allow for placing checks on implicit bias because the process can get so sterilized. And so for those folks out there who might be questioning the value of this, making sure that we can be cognizant of our diversity rather than ignorant of our lack of diversity is, I think, a great step. As others have said, this really will go, I think, a long way in helping us battle some of the systemic racism that's out there.
Thanks. Member Albinado.
Thank you very much, President Epstein. I just wanted to thank the Chancellor's Office staff and all the stakeholders that had input into this well-written resolution. I remember protesting Prop 209 many, many moons ago when I was an undergrad, and am very glad that this is getting to our table. Prop 209 was based on an antiquated rationale that has become more blatantly obsolete in these pivotal times. And to tag along to something that Board Member Rawlings said, we must move from being colorblind to being color conscious. So I strongly support this resolution as a strong statement of where the heart of our system is.
Any other board comments?
You see me? Yes, this is Pam. So this is 24 years in the making. And from just a practical perspective, having been a trustee for 20 of those 24 years, and someone who fought against 209 personally when it was a proposed proposition, that trying to work around trying to get folks of color into contracting, trying to work around outreach to students, trying to meet them where they are, it was Herculean, and we missed a lot of folks. 24 years later, we are a state that represents about 60 to 63% of our Californians are Californians of color. And this is obsolete. It leaves out so many folks who should have had a voice, should have been recognized, and it has made us try to do cartwheels around it, and in many ways very unsuccessfully. So I wholeheartedly support this resolution. It sets, once again, this body of leaders on the Board of Governors in a way that really represents what is the best of California and what leadership looks like when it comes to these issues.
Thank you.
Tom,
Does
if I
anyone?
could,
Yeah, sure.
sure. I just wanted to also echo kind of what Hildy was talking about in terms of student involvement in this issue and student and faculty involvement in trying to lift up the real impacts that Prop 29 have had on generations of students. I too remember being a young person and protesting this when I was in high school and college. And it's great to see that I know over the last 24 years, people like Pam and so many others in the system, whether they're students, faculty, administrators, have really kept the conversation going, the torch burning on this issue to really push it to where it is now, where we're actually, the voters of California will have the opportunity to vote to repeal this proposition. So I think it's really a testament to the leadership of students, faculty, administrators on campuses across the state that we've gotten to this point. So it really is a great opportunity for all of us to lend our voice to the work that they've done collectively over the decades. So thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
I have a quick,
Sure.
I wholeheartedly support this, and I just have a quick question. I think it's the third whereas on the second page. Aren't we slightly more, haven't the number of colleges increased? Or I know we're not, aren't we more than 115 at this juncture?
You're a great editor. Yes, we are now 116.
Let's keep, Tom, don't say anything else to me for the rest of the meeting. I'll leave with that compliment.
Okay, any other board comments? I know we have some public comments on this.
President Epstein, if it would be appropriate now, I think we've worked out a suggestion for how the motion could read to adopt both Board Member Perry's very excellent and on point edit, as well as Board Member Costa's suggestion. So unless you would rather do that after public comment, but.
Let's do that when we make the motion. So let's do the public comment first.
Sure.
The public comment period for item 3.5 is now open. Please submit your comment through the Q&A feature of the Zoom platform and include the item number in your submission. You can either identify yourself or specify that you would like to remain anonymous in your comment, and your comment will then be read out loud by a Chancellor's Office staff member. I have received one comment through the Q&A so far, and I will go ahead and read it now. Good afternoon, President Epstein, Vice President Haines, Chancellor Oakley, and the Board of Governors. This is Debbie Klein, President of the Faculty Association of California Community Colleges. The repealing of Prop 209 passed in 1996 is long overdue. During this national and global movement for racial justice, Prop 16 is even more urgent. One of FACT's top priorities is diversifying the faculty as we increase full-time positions. Reestablishing affirmative action will ensure that our colleges address systemic racism in our hiring and retention processes and practices. FACT's board voted to support Prop 16. FACT's Political Action Committee will be engaging in a get out the vote and an education campaign. In support of the Prop 16 campaign, FACT is also collaborating with our systems partners who serve on the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Implementation Work Group. Thank you. And I have received 2 more comments on this item, and I will read them now. The Community College League of California urges an aye vote. Proposition 16's passage supports the statewide effort to further diversify faculty and all of the dedicated current and future employees of our 116 colleges. A 21st century education necessitates passage of this measure. Larry Galizio, the League. And the final comment that I have received, I'll read it now. I would like to thank the board for its support for this proposition. As an employee of the Peralta Community College District for 40+ years, I have seen the damage done by Prop 209. Shirley Costa. And those are all of the comments that I have at this time.
I've not received any public comment for item 3.5 via email at this time.
Okay, thanks. So now back to you, Vice Chancellor O'Brien. Do you want to read an amended version of the resolution that incorporates the comments of Member Costa and Perry?
Certainly. As to Member Perry, the motion could just be adopt the resolution with an amendment to reflect the accurate number of California community colleges. As to Board Member Costa's comment, I do have suggested language from our General Counsel saying, and whereas the repeal would enable the California community colleges, CSU and UC, to use government contracting to enhance the diversity of government contractors by focusing on minority and women-owned business. If that is acceptable to the board, the motion itself, I understand, does not have to include that exact language because I believe the motion has to be made by an individual member. So the motion could just be, adopt the measure 1 with amendments to reflect the accurate number of colleges, and 2 amendments to reflect the spirit of Board Member Costa's comment, focusing on contracting.
Board Member Costa, are you comfortable with that?
Yes.
Okay, great. So with before we do have the motion, I do want to observe the kind of the delicious irony that this Prop 209 was originally developed by a member of the Board of Regents, and now leading the charge on the Board of Regents against it are, among others, our own Chancellor and our former President, Cecilia Estelano. So, and achieving a unanimous vote on the Board of Regents to repeal it. So, that's real progress. With that, we'll take a motion.
This is Pam Haines. I'll second.
Okay, that was Aguinaldo and Haines. Okay, please call the roll.
Hildegard B. Aguinaldo.
Aye.
Darius W. Anderson.
Yes.
Amy M. Costa.
Aye.
Tom Epstein.
Aye.
Felicia Escobar Carrillo.
Aye.
Cullum Fitzgerald.
Aye.
Jolina M. Grande.
Aye.
Pamela Haines.
Aye.
Kevin J. Hall. Kim Perigo.
Yes.
Jennifer L. Perry.
Aye.
Bill Rawlings.
Aye.
Alma Salazar.
Aye.
Valerie L. Shaw.
Yes.
Blas Villalobos.
Aye.
Okay, great. The motion carries, and hopefully we'll have a successful election. On to the last action item, 4.4, College Buys Program for Procurement of Goods and Services for Community College Districts.
That 4.4, President Epstein, is a first reading.
I'm sorry for, yeah.
But we can move on to.
Oh wait, I'm sorry. I skipped. I'm sorry. I just I'm not sure why. I went to the bottom of the first reading. So we don't have to start with that. I apologize. Let's go back up to item 4.1, and maybe we should take a short break because this could be a little while. Should we take a break? Everybody, come back at 3:25.
Yes, please.
Okay, great. Okay, back to the first reading agenda, and I'm now getting my numbers in order. And we'll start with 4.1, the adoption of the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Statement into the Title V regs.
Thank you, Board President Epstein. I hope you can hear me. We are here in Sacramento, and I begin this item with a lot of gratitude and appreciation for everyone that got us to this point. Specifically, a lot of support from the EEO and Diversity Advisory Committee, the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Task Force, which all of you created and supported in 2018, and most recently, the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Implementation Work Group, which was launched March of 2020. I also want to specifically thank Board Member Aguinaldo, who has served in all three in the last 2 years. This item is a part of the 106 board recommendations that you adopted in September of 2019. The Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Implementation Work Group and Integration Plan recommended that this board adopt Title V regulation changes to adopt the commitment of the Board of Governors to diversity, equity, and inclusion. The standing orders that you see in front of you are very similar to the statement that you adopted in September of 2019 with two very important distinctions. So these are changes that have taken place in the last 90 days. First, the language is different in the sense that it deletes the word vestiges. We've done a lot of learning in the last 60 days and 90 days around how we talk about institutional racism in this country. The word vestiges did not seem like an appropriate word to reflect where we are as a society, and more importantly, the commitment of this board. And then the second change is really in acknowledging institutional racism and our desire to create an anti-racist environment at our colleges. So you see those three changes. One is the omission of the word vestiges, which was deleted. And then more importantly, the addition of two words, institutional racism and anti-racist environment. With me today is our Deputy Counsel, Fermin Villegas. He and I are more than happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Deputy Chancellor. Board comments? No comments? Any public comments?
Hi, Tom, sorry, it took me a while to unmute from there. Just a quick comment. I wanted to thank everybody who is working on the DEI implementation work group, as well as the EO and Diversity Advisory Committee. There are a lot of new members, especially to the work group, and the caliber of the discussion is so impressive and so robust. And I think that was incorporated into the statement that we would constantly be looking back at ourselves with the aim of continuously improving on what we've done. And certainly the new voices are doing that. So I just wanted to thank them and of course to Deputy Chancellor Gonzalez for her leadership on this.
Thanks. Vice President Haines, did you have a comment as well?
Yes, and I'm not going to repeat things that I've said to my colleagues, but just to note that this is an important step. It's the action we can take here in terms of the words. The next step is those of action out in the field, the work that has to get done there. And having this board support that is just critically important.
Thank you. Anyone else? Are there any public comments?
The public comment period for item 4.1 is now open. Please submit your comments through the Q&A feature of the Zoom platform and include the item number in your submission. You can either identify yourself or specify that you would like to remain anonymous in your comment, and it will then be read out loud by a Chancellor's Office staff member. I have received one comment through the Q&A, and I will read it now. Good afternoon again. This is Debbie Klein, President of the Faculty Association of California Community. FAC is encouraged to see this powerful statement become part of our systems regulations. The FAC board will be voting to adopt this statement as we further institutionalize our association's commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Thank you. And that is the only comment I have received so far through the Q&A.
I have received one public comment for this item via email. I am Dr. Rick Scuderi, retired past president of the California Association of Post-Secondary Education and Disability, Capet, and its former legislative committee chairperson. I commend this regulatory addition as being beneficial to all and fostering the goals of our community colleges.
Okay, thanks. Is there anybody else in the queue?
No additional comments received.
Okay, well, this is not an action item. So with that, we will move on to item 4.2, board standing order amendments regarding the Chancellor's contracting authority.
Go ahead, General Counsel.
Okay. Thank you. So I'm going to take a little bit more time providing some background on this than I might ordinarily do. As you know, President Epstein, I have been working through changes to the standing orders sort of serially over the last 3 years that I've been here. And I wanted to describe why we're focusing on the contract and grant standing orders, first of all. So it's part of that effort to update the standing orders, make them a little more clear for staff to grapple with. We want to adhere also to the board's direction to provide a greater focus on the outcomes of our contracts and grants rather than compliance, and respond to expressions from board members over the months about an interest in greater disclosure surrounding our grants. We also want to try to better balance the board's time on the contracts and grants that it looks at with the staff resources and try to reduce some friction in these processes. We're trying to make the board's oversight of these items more meaningful. So I'd like to spend a little bit of time on a little background on Prop 98 and how it works, particularly for the newer board members who may not be that familiar with it. And I noted that former member Baum is still listening in. This was an issue that was near and dear to his heart, so hopefully he's still listening. He can chime in and make a comment a little later. So the legislature requires the Chancellor's office to do a lot of statewide work, but it doesn't provide us with a lot of money in our general fund to perform those functions. What it does instead is allocate, oh, I just got a text from the Chancellor. President Epstein, this is one of those first reading items where there's a script for you.
I did not receive it. I did not receive a script for this.
Okay. Well, I think for the public's notice of this item, this is a first reading. We are obligated to have a first reading of any, actually, no, this is not a regulation, it's a standing order. We don't need to do it on this one. I apologize.
Mark,
okay.
Clarify
Yes.
the previous item 4.1 was the first reading. It is Title V regulation changes. So that does require a first reading script. If you could please email it to Board President Epstein.
Okay, I think Andrea has that. I'll email it as soon as we're finished this one. Does that work, Desi?
Yes.
Okay.
Also, since we've already finished with that item, should we reopen it and follow the formal?
Yeah, we probably should. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So the legislature, getting back to our statewide work, the legislature doesn't provide us a lot of money in our general fund for that work, but instead allows us to expend Proposition 98 funds. Those funds, under the Constitution and related statutes, are required to be spent through a community college district. We cannot spend them directly ourselves. But these funds are significant in amount. We get over $100 million to expend in this way every year. And they would amount to the Chancellor's discretionary funds. So they are very important to achieving the work of the vision. It's really these funds that support a lot of that work. Now, the board, when it approves contracts and grants, traditionally spends a lot of time focused on fiscal agency agreements. And this is how we expend the funds. We send the funds to a district. The district functions as the Chancellor's office fiscal agent. And that, in a sense, what that means is that the district is acting as the Chancellor's banker and accountant. But that fiscal agency agreement may state in very broad purposes what those funds will be used for, but it's not really generally in very much granular detail. The reason for that is that the fiscal agency agreements tend to be executed at the beginning of the fiscal year, and the details of how those funds will be spent is something that emerges later through the third-party agreements between the fiscal agency and a third party that will actually be performing the services. What we are trying to accomplish is to have Chancellor's office staff exercising more discretion over those third-party agreements. And we want to have the board focus on those third-party agreements as well. And so that is part of the nature of the relationship that we're trying to change. The real nitty-gritty of the substantive work is decided by those third-party agreements. That's where we set our, yeah.
I'm sorry, I want to interrupt. You said to have the Chancellor's office to express more discretion over third-party agreements. Did you mean more authority over?
More authority, exercise more authority, yeah. And provide transparency in those agreements to the board. So under our current board practices, the board doesn't see any of those third-party agreements. You see the fiscal agency agreements, but none of the underlying agreements. And we think those are very important to the board's understanding of the work that we're doing and how we're going to achieve the vision for success. So turning to the standing order amendments, I want to just walk through some of the principal changes that we're proposing that the board make. The standing orders would require that each contract clearly articulate goals, objectives of the agreements entered into either by the Chancellor's office or on behalf of the Chancellor's office. So that would cover the fiscal agent third-party agreements that we've already discussed. And it's important that this is a clearly articulated goal or requirement of the board in the board's delegation to the Chancellor so that the staff is clear on what the expectations are when they are developing contracts. The proposal would also adjust the financial thresholds that for board review. We are not suggesting that we change the time threshold, so any agreement that would be of more than 3 years duration would still be something that the board would review. But we looked at the financial thresholds that are currently at $100,000 for most agreements, $50,000 for consulting contracts, and looked at the standing orders, which have not been amended since 1996, at least this standing order. And I don't know when those financial thresholds were set. It could be that they were set before that. So we looked at these numbers. We applied a CPI analysis to this, and $100 in 1996 would be worth, depending on where you are in California, between $192 and $256 today. So that's how we came up with the $250,000 as the threshold. Now the national CPI is below that, so it could be that we are leapfrogging a little bit the amount of the threshold, but if this is a standing order that will be in place for a number of years, that just seemed like to us an appropriate threshold to fix. And in our analysis of the number of grants from last year that fell between 100,000 and 250,000, there were about 44 grants and no contracts. So that would be the number of grants that you would no longer be reviewing if the proposal was adopted as suggested. We also would say that the board would no longer be providing previous approval to fiscal agency agreements. That is a significant number of there are a significant number of these agreements annually. The reason we're suggesting that these are really not worth the board approval is that these are really agreements just for banking and accounting services. Those fiscal agency agreements do not, in a meaningful way, disclose the services that will be performed with those funds. That information will come to you through reports on the subcontracts. So the effect of this change would be to direct staff resources to reporting out to the board on all of the contracts that we are entering into. And we would be developing a format for that report to the board with the president and vice president, and organizing it in a way that would be most useful to the board members. And that would be something that we would produce on a schedule that the board wants us to produce it on, maybe quarterly, maybe more frequently. And the idea would be to provide information about all of our contracts, but also update the progress on those contracts. That's another, that is an issue that we have heard from the board in the past, what has happened on this past contract. So we would be trying to improve the nature of the reporting that we're doing so that it's not a situation where you hear about a fiscal agency agreement in the beginning, it gets executed, and you never hear about what has happened under that agreement in the future. We would be wanting to provide regular reports on the outcomes. Another point that has been confusing for staff is that the existing standing order from 1996 expresses a strong preference for competitive bidding. That seems to have emerged from a prior law before the Board of Governors became exempt from the Public Contracting Code. So, well, we are exempt on most of our contracts. Fiscal agency agreements up to $20 million are expressly exempt by statute. We're also exempt from competitively bidding service contracts. That encompasses the vast majority of what we do. And so there is confusion about when to apply competitive bidding when the Chancellor, when the standing orders from the board still express a preference for it. We think it is more important to focus on ensuring that all contracts are let in a cost-effective manner, assuring sound fiscal practices. We're protecting against the misuse of public funds. And that would be now an express requirement of all contracts that are let not only on behalf of the Chancellor's office, by the Chancellor's office, but also on behalf of the Chancellor's office. So that would be a principle that would flow down to the third-party contracts that I've described. Okay, so I think I will stop there. That's a lot of words, but I think I'll stop there and ask if there are any questions. That might be a good approach to clarifying any uncertainties we have.
I have lots of questions, Tom. Not a shock.
No surprise.
Doesn't surprise me, Amy.
Mark, you were ready. You knew I was going to have questions. I'm going to try and do this in the three main buckets as you've laid them out, Mark, which is one, the goals of the contracts. I commend staff for bringing that forward. I think that's something we've long asked for. And so I like that being, encapsulated here. I'm going to use your word, the fiscal threshold. There's two things happening, which is the actual dollar value. And I agree with your characterization. 100 to 250,000 seems like a big leap to me personally. And secondarily, that you're waiving it entirely for the fiscal agents. And I would say that at least during my time, those fiscal agency agreements were material at one point regarding a fiscal agent agreement with the Emoja program, in which it was important for us to see that the fiscal agent, there was potentially some issues. And so right now we have a bifurcated process in which we only talk about the fiscal agent and we don't get to the goals. But I would submit to staff, you should really bring us both as the total package. You should bring forward to the board within whatever fiscal threshold we determine who the fiscal agent is, as well as what the operational and programmatic goals are for the contract. So those are my comments.
So one distinction that I've tried to make in these standing orders that was not really clearly made in the past is a distinction between what is purely a fiscal agent agreement, which is the banking and accounting arrangement that I described before, and a situation where a community college district is actually providing services. So that would not be strictly a fiscal agency agreement. That would be a grant. And we have, and this is part of the confusion among staff, is that we have merged those two concepts and they are distinct. So where we are providing grant funds to a community college district, where we are expecting the district to perform actual services and be accountable to the Chancellor's office, that would not come under the exemption for fiscal agency agreements. So those would still come to the board if they meet the financial threshold for board review. And I think in the Emoja situation, if I recall correctly, they were probably loosely referred to as a fiscal agent. So I understand why you think that, but there were actually services being performed. So that contract would still be subject to board review for that grant.
Can I just ask a clarifying question though? Because as I recall in that particular situation, it was a multi-district arrangement that one district was kind of the administrative entity. So, I mean, I agree with you. It's a little bit complex, but in that case, I mean, it was material because some of my colleagues, were very interested in that particular contract. And the issue really was with the person who was serving in the more ministerial function.
Okay, I think your recollection is a little different from mine, but you're probably right. I think though, if I recall, that the person in the ministerial function was also involved in the Emoja program itself. They were not just acting as the Chancellor's office banker. They would have been exercising more discretion over how those funds are used and how they are distributed. And I think there was also some involvement of the Chancellor's office staff in that process that needed to be worked out at the time.
I think that's how I recall it too.
Yeah.
My recollection, I mean, I might be wrong, but my recollection was that Chabot was the fiscal agent, but that there were other individuals who were running the Emoja program who were having difficulty getting the payments from Chabot.
Well, so just to add to that, but there were staff within the Chancellor's office that did have some oversight in terms of accountability and had issues. So it was more than just the role of Chabot as a fiscal agent. I think that it was a little bit more convoluted than what we would normally see.
Mark?
Yes.
I'm again, and I excuse my ignorance here, but so does this only apply to the fiscal agent contracts, or does this apply for every contract that the Chancellor's office does?
So what the standing order does in general is a delegation of the board's contracting authority to the chancellor. So that's writ large, that's what the standing order is. The change that we're making that would exempt a new category of contracts from prior board approval would be the fiscal agency agreements. And those would be purely ones involving banking and accounting services, essentially. Where there are situations that a community college district is providing actual services to the chancellor's office or some statewide program, that would not be a fiscal agency agreement, that would be something more. And those would not be exempted under this proposal.
But
so
there's a new fiscal threshold, Mark, right?
But
like
there is
right
a new
now,
fiscal, yes.
anything that's over 100,000 comes to us, and they are changing that regardless of fiscal agency or whatever. Any contract that's 250 or above, we would delegate authority under this proposal.
That's correct. So,
and that's across the board, Mark?
That would be across the board.
Okay. So I mean, I want to reiterate Amy's point. To me, the reason you institute these are to shelter us from embarrassment and to make sure the system is protected. Even though I understand how you came up with the escalator, just on the sound of $250,000 to me seems very high. And, if there were 2 or 3 of these let, then you're talking about, $750,000. And so I'm concerned about the optics of that in today's environment of us not being responsible for, $250,000.
Yeah, that's a fair point. And to me, those thresholds aren't the core of this proposal. So if there's discomfort among the board members for that level, I don't think you'll get any strong resistance from us. It seems like increasing the threshold somewhat from thresholds that were established in 1996 makes some sense. But if this isn't the timing, given the circumstances and the financial exigencies we're all facing, then I don't think that the proposal is weakened from a staff standpoint, even if we leave the thresholds as they are. But
is the motivation here to lessen the amount of staff time that the chancellor's office has to spend in reviewing these?
So it's not so much a review. We're still going to be drafting these contracts. I think the way this comes up is frequently, the timing of the board meetings. Every couple of months means that whenever a contract cannot be entered until it's approved, then we need to wait 2 months, a month or 2 months. And so it's a question of, balancing, trying to find the balance between, okay, what is a contract that really requires the attention of the 17 board members? Where is the threshold of significance for that? And where is the board comfortable allowing the staff the discretion to go forward and contract? And so we're proposing to increase the thresholds. If there is a lower threshold, or if the board wants to keep the threshold where it is, that's the sense of the board, and it's fine, obviously. But it just seemed, in looking at these, at the existing standing orders, understanding that it's probably 25 years or more since those thresholds have been touched, it might make sense to give a little more flexibility.
So this is Pam. I'm supportive of raising the threshold, maybe not to 250,000, but is there a sense of 250,000 being out of line with other other agencies that let contracts of this sort?
We're an interesting hybrid. We're not a district. My background was at the Attorney General's office, where the Attorney General had the authority to do this, to contract in this way. We are exempted from the general services review of contracts, which happens for a number of the state agencies under the governor's office. So I don't know that there's really a close analogy to us. I think you have discretion to set that threshold where you think it's appropriate.
Other board comments?
Can I just go back to one of my other questions, which is it unreasonable operationally for you to bring forward both the fiscal agent and the third-party agreement at the same time as a completed package?
Yeah, it's functionally, that will not work. So the fiscal agency agreements, you approved a number of them last May. As you'll recall, there were a number of really stacked contracts and grants item in May. They tend to be stacked towards the beginning of the fiscal year, and the emphasis is to send the money to the districts, and in the category, the general categorical pots that they're in. But the details of how those funds are going to be spent often emerges over the course of the next year or two or even three. We have authority to expend those funds for up to 3 years. So, and the details can change. So I think in looking at what I've seen over the last couple of years, it seems to me that the fiscal agency, the discussion of the fiscal agency agreements and their broad purposes isn't really all that meaningful. I think
but you're choosing to give them the cash without the instruction. And my point is, from a process standpoint, it does not have to be that way.
So we are, well, without instruction, these districts act as fiscal agents. And if we were to enter into separate fiscal agency agreements multiple times during the course of the 3-year expenditure period, it would add substantially to the work that we're trying to accomplish.
I guess I just, and I don't want to belabor the point, but I just don't understand that, honestly. I mean, you would have an agreement that would be over the term of the 3 years. It would coincide with whatever the appropriation instructions are, or however you want to send them out. Because to me, it's like, if you have the fiscal agency agreement that happens in May, but the policy decisions are not made until July, I'm just not sure why those things couldn't happen simultaneously. And there could be operational issues that I'm unaware of. And that fiscal agency agreement in July, in concert with how the funds were to be appropriated, would be good for the term of the appropriation across the 3 years.
I think the assumption there is that in July or September or November, all of the operational uses of those funds would be identified. Now we do provide broad purposes for those grant funds. I think it is more appropriate to specify the purposes of how those funds are going to be used in the fiscal agency agreements, because that's where the real contracting happens, where we're identifying a specific scope of work and identifying specific objectives for the contractors to undertake. In fact, we're identifying the contractors at that point. I think that if we were to have that degree of specificity and provide you with the subcontracts at the same time that the fiscal agency agreements were provided, it would be really unmanageable.
And I would agree with that. The challenge, part of this challenge is the sort of the requirement of the Chancellor's office not to sort of be the contractor, letting out contracts, and therefore has to push money out for programs to the other colleges and uses a fiscal agent to do so. It is an extremely cumbersome process, but much of it the Chancellor's office has no control over whatsoever. And so that's where it lies. And then the challenge relative to it being sort of unmanageable is, in many cases, these program dollars need to get out to the field to actually get the work done. So any kind of chokehold relative to the pushing out the dollars and setting up a fiscal agent, or asking for the potential contractees to then sort of figure out ahead of time. That's additional time required. It isn't. It's a nasty process that our colleges have to go through, and the Chancellor's office has to go through. But it does to do it another way. In my humble estimation is just to add weeks, not even weeks, but months to a process in which we're trying to push dollars out to get work done on behalf of our students in many cases.
Member Shaw.
I just wanted to go back to the $250,000 limit. Why was that versus 100? Let me just say, in the city of Los Angeles, when I used to work on the Board of Public Works, and we awarded, $100 million, $200 million contracts, we still had that $100,000 limit. So I don't understand the 250 here.
Mm-hmm. So we're not a district. So we are I think, and it's a kind of a question about what the board wants to spend its time on. So if the board wants to spend more of its time as a regulatory and policy body over the state, that's one approach. But we're not involved in the kind of nuts and bolts governance of a community college district the way local government bodies are. And so that to me strikes me as a meaningful difference. This body doesn't meet every month. Sometimes I understand local bodies may even meet more frequently. So the idea was to increase the threshold from what it was 25 years ago. And we looked at the CPI and adjusted according to that with some extra, assuming that this standing order might not get changed again for another 10 or 15 years.
Mark, I want to just push back on one point, though. It's not just about how we want to spend our time. As board members, we have a fiduciary responsibility.
Of course.
So, I think, yes, in part it's that we meet monthly, but we have to counterbalance that with our responsibility of taxpayer dollars. And to Pam's point, I don't want to make it administratively burdensome, but I hold that to be a pretty serious responsibility, especially in light of the current budget and economic constraints we all face.
Board President Epstein, if I could add, I don't think that the issue of the threshold is a major issue for staff. So, I think we can certainly ask General Counsel to chat with you and the Board Vice President and Member Costa. And if there is a number that makes sense, happy to propose that. And in the interest of time, this issue does not require, the timing doesn't require us to settle this today. So we can always continue to work through it and bring it back for a first reading again at the September meeting with some additional input from the voices that we've heard on this conversation.
Well, I would prefer that we take it to a second reading, but accept all these comments and come back with a second reading that meets the criteria. For my part, I'm open-minded about the threshold. I can see it both ways. I know you guys come to me with contracts that need to be approved in between board meetings, on a semi-regular basis, and I could see some flexibility there above what we currently have. But to me, by far the larger issue is this other one on what we're reviewing with respect to the intermediary contracts versus the contracts where the work is actually being done. As I've been a pretty consistent voice on trying to get to the accountability of all this money that goes out the door and identifying what the actual goals are and whether the goals have been met and who has been responsible for meeting the goals. I think what you guys are saying here today is that the fiscal intermediaries really are not the the people who hold the subcontractors responsible. It's the Chancellor's office that ultimately determines whether or not the goals are being met. And all the college districts do is basically take the money from us and accept bills. If that's the case, then I don't see a huge loss in not having the board have to approve all of these fiscal intermediary contracts with community college districts. I mean, if it does become more substantive, where the district is actually playing a role in, setting the agenda, then I think we should. But I am very interested in knowing who's actually spending the money, and what they're spending it on, and what results what their objectives have been given, and whether or not they've met them. I think that's vitally important and has been sorely lacking. And I know that's what you're trying to do here. I guess I'm trying to wrap my head around how many of these subcontracts there are, and and I don't believe we're getting in the business of approving them under this policy, but we are going to be in the business of having a lot more transparency around them and being able to ask questions about them. And where the ball is being dropped, we can identify who's dropping it and impact what the future is. I mean, is that what we're doing here today?
That is the idea. There are probably several hundred of these contracts that the board currently has no transparency on. We would be providing access to those contracts, who we're contracting with, what the objectives are, what goals have been achieved, and how much is being paid under them. That's the idea.
So do other board members have thoughts on this?
I don't have I just don't have the fiscal background or the contract background to weigh in on it at that level. But I do want to make sure that I'm clear on what our role is as board members, what we're accountable for, and what is the accountability. What are the checks and balances if we change these items? I'm not entirely clear on that. So right now I'm going to have to do some homework between now and the second read to wrap my mind around it and get a little bit better understanding of it. But that would be my position on it, is kind of like, I think it's important if it's our role to be checks and balances, as cumbersome as that can be, that's a role we should still continue to take. And whatever reasonable threshold exists, and I don't know what that threshold would be, I think that's a point to talk about, but I wouldn't be comfortable relinquishing a responsibility that we have ultimately.
Mark, Hildy. Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, Hildy.
I just want to echo Kim's sentiments. I think this is something that I also need to do my homework on. I mean, on the issue of the threshold, I wonder if it's possible to get some high-level statistics on what the bell curve for the contracts looks like, just so that where we can expect the majority of the high-value contracts to be, and perhaps we could draw the line there, knowing that maybe some people take a $500,000 contract and divide it into 5 pieces and turn it into $100,000 installments, so it evades the review. But I think some very high-level reporting out of what we're facing would help. Kim and I do our homework a little bit more diligently. But I agree with her comments.
Fair enough. If we got into the practice of splitting up contracts to evade review, you should fire me.
We can consider that.
That's not what we're doing. That's
if we get it, right?
I think Member Hull, yeah.
As far as all of us doing our homework, Mark, is there an executive summary or a more of a bullet point presentation you can give to us so we can easily digest it, or make it as easy as possible to digest?
Yeah, I can work on something for you that addresses and is particularly focused on the questions that I've heard today.
Please, God.
Because it sounds a little daunting when you say there's hundreds of these contracts.
Yeah. So I think that's going to be, I think that the important detail there is that we're going to have to work out an approach to preparing that report that will allow you to access the things that you're interested in. And part of that will be identifying what the value of those contracts are. Could be that the board president would say, you know, don't report to me contracts under $25,000 or something. I don't know. But the point will be to try to organize that in a fashion that you'll be able to identify, you know, maybe the technology contracts, or if that's something that you're interested in, maybe things that are particularly focused on guided pathways. Whatever the case may be, I think that we can make that sort of manageable for you through a well thought out reporting structure for you.
So this may be an imperfect analogy, but as we talk about this, I've been thinking about the CARES Act and how the CARES Act money was given to banks to process applications. And what happened was they favored their big customers, and so it turns out they were making substantive decisions that were to the benefit of themselves, rather than the purpose for which the program was created. And so I think we would all be concerned about a situation where a fiscal intermediary had friendly contractors that they were just using because of their relationships and weren't really the best performers at what work needed to be done. So I think we need to think about that issue as we approach this. Ideally, I'd like to not have to go back for another first reading, because I'd hate to spend 4 more months dealing with this. If there's a way that we can be transparent with the public about what we're considering and give the public a chance to weigh in, but come back with a second reading in 2 months that then we can debate and hopefully come to a conclusion on, I think that would be the optimum solution.
Yeah, we can do that. So the board's procedures account for amendments to a first reading item that can be taken on second reading. So we'll give notice to whatever those changes are. And we should be able to come back with a product in September that is acceptable, hopefully to at least a bare majority. No, more than that.
And if we don't
have a potential suggestion for the fiscal agent that I'd like staff to consider, to your point of being transparent with the public. Because I'm hearing, Mark, what you're saying about operationally the challenges between the timeline between fiscal agents and the actual third-party agreements. One thing that might be worthy of consideration is creating a fiscal agent vendor pool in which we act upon at one time. You have a pool of pre-qualified fiscal agents. You can create that term for, up to 3 years or whatever is concentric with the actual funding agreement you need, so that we still are voting on it and have transparency, but we're still looking at kind of the more programmatic elements that are in the actual third-party agreements.
Right. I think that's a great idea. I think part of that captures in part what we were trying to achieve in the system of support. And it's something that I think that we can look towards implementing over the next year.
Okay, so then, and if you come back at second reading and we can't reach consensus, then we can just delay it another 2 months, right? I mean, right. So we're not losing anything by going forward with a second reading. We can still slow this train down if we need to.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
Okay, I appreciate all the comments. I was expecting that there would be a number of them. Thank you. You've given us some things to think about.
Okay, thanks, Mark. So let's go back to the previous item, 4.1. And I now have the script, and I apologize for not following the procedure the first time around. So item 4.1 is a first reading and public hearing for proposed amendments to Title V of the California Code of Regulations, promulgating the Board of Governors Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Statement. The Chancellor and staff will now provide information on the item. So we have heard the Chancellor and staff provide the information. So now we've all heard the item presented. I will now bang my artificial gavel, And the public hearing on item 4.1, the proposed amendments to California Code of Regulations, Title V, Sections 51200 and 51201 is now open. The purpose of the hearing is for the Board of Governors to receive comments and testimony from members of the public regarding the proposed regulatory action. At this time, the floor is open for comments from the public. So now, please post the opportunity for comments on the screen for item 4.1. 4.1. Okay, are there any public comments for item 4.1?
There are no additional public comments for item 4.1 at this time.
Okay, hearing none, the public hearing is closed. This concludes the public hearing on this matter. Now, back to item 4.2, I just remembered that we didn't ask for public comment on item 4.2, so I think we ought to, before we shut down item 4.2, let's go back and see if there is public comment on item 4.2.
All right, the public comment period for item 4.2 is now open. Please submit your comments through the Q&A feature of the Zoom platform and include the item number in your submission. You can either identify yourself or you can specify that you would like to remain anonymous in your comment. And your comment will then be read out loud by a Chancellor's Office staff member. I have not received any comments for item 4.2 through the Q&A yet, but if you stand by 20 seconds in case anybody needs to finish typing their comment. Christina, do you have any?
I've not received any public comment from this item via email.
Okay, that being the case, we can move on to item 4.3, the Chancellor's Emergency Authority Regulation, first reading.
Board President Epstein, if I can, I'd like to make some opening comments and then turn it over to the General Counsel.
Before you do that, let me just read the script here. Item 4.3 is a first reading and public hearing for proposed amendments to Title V of the California Code of Regulations establishing the Chancellor's emergency authorities. The Chancellor and staff will now provide the information on this item.
All right, thank you, Board President Epstein and members of the board. I just wanted to begin by saying that, you know, I take this item very seriously. As we know, the Board of Governors authorized me to take on emergency authority back at the beginning of the COVID-19 crisis. I would I would much prefer to be in a position where I could say the COVID-19 crisis is over and that we can move forward. Unfortunately, I'm not in a position to say that at this point, and I believe that there continues to be the need to exercise special authority to continue to assist the colleges and college districts that continue to wrestle with this crisis. Our General Counsel will discuss the authority and the regulation being proposed. This issue was brought forward to the Consultation Council. At that point, I did not hear any objection to the additional authority. That's not to say that we won't hear objection, but I just wanted to again state that this authority, if granted, we will continue to exercise it with great care and continue to ensure that statewide academic senate and other constituent groups that are impacted by any decision are consulted. With that, I'll turn it over to the General Counsel.
Thank you, Chancellor. So back in March, we held a special meeting to adopt a regulation that would authorize the Chancellor to take emergency actions in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Under the board's procedures, a regulation that's adopted in a special meeting without the full notice and comment may only remain in effect for 180 days. So that brings us to today. And we are asking the board to adopt an emergency powers regulation for the Chancellor that would be part that would be permanently part of Title V. So just some key features of this version. We would be authorizing the Chancellor to take action directed at a local, regional, or statewide emergency. That is a slight tweak to the earlier language. We're just anticipating that there may be circumstances where we want to maintain the continuity of education, but we would like it to be expressed that the Chancellor, if he were to suspend a regulation, for example, wouldn't need to do it on a statewide basis if the emergency didn't call for it. So that's why we made that change. This regulation would still allow the Chancellor to suspend regulations as appropriate, again, for the purposes of maintaining the continuity of education. A new wrinkle that we are proposing in this permanent regulation would be the authority to establish temporary procedures. Now, the reason for this is that there were a couple of instances where we were trying to work through what we could do to help the college districts, and there were things that seemed to be on the threshold between suspending a regulation and adopting something new, which would typically be the board's role. And we were respectful of that without having express authority to adopt temporary procedures, but we think that that is an element of the flexibility that would be appropriate to make express. Any actions that the Chancellor would take under this authority would require express approval by the President or the Vice President in the President's absence. And we would allow the actions to take effect for the duration of the emergency or as otherwise stated. Now, there are some things that may be appropriate to remain in force to some degree caused by the emergency, but perhaps lasting longer than the emergency. So if the emergency were to end midterm, there may be some things that would make sense to continue until the end of term before returning to the status quo. That's what that language is for. All of the Chancellor's emergency actions would need to be reported to the full board. And I think Member Hall asked this question back in March. What does the board do if they don't like what the Chancellor has done? It makes this rule makes it express that the board can undo an emergency action that the board has taken at the next meeting. So, and the last piece I'll mention is that this regulation would exempt from the consultation process emergency actions taken by the board, but it does impose on the Chancellor the obligation to engage with stakeholders to the extent that that's reasonably feasible, and then expressly references the role of the academic senate with respect to academic matters. And that was a comment that the academic senate made leading up to the consultation council. So that is the proposal. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any board comments or questions?
Mark, just a quick question. I think one of the issues with this is that when would the emergency action end? And if it looks like, or to take your example, if the emergency ended midterm and it would be the Chancellor's discretion to take it to the end of the term, does this provide some mechanism where we can look at that end of the emergency and then provide for some review then? Or should the discretion be entirely within the Chancellor to decide when the end of the actual emergency action would be, even though the emergency action ended before that? Right. Does that make sense?
I think so, yeah. So the emergency would end when the governor says the emergency is over. So that puts an end date on the emergency itself. I would expect that in the emergency order, the Chancellor would describe when the emergency action he or she has taken would expire. I think in most instances, the action will expire when the emergency does, but there may be some instances where, for administrative reasons, we would want it to go forward, and we would expect the Chancellor to explain that in the emergency order.
Okay, so as long as that mechanism is reflected in the regs, I think it would just make it a little bit clearer.
Okay.
for the
So you're
small
saying-
minority of times. Yeah.
So where the remaining in effect is as otherwise stated. So that is the mechanism. It would, I think the implication there is that the Chancellor is stating in the emergency action that it is to end at some other point in time. So
Yeah, it just seems like there's some additional clarity that we can put in C and D that provides for when the emergency action outlasts the declaration of emergency.
Okay, I'll look at that.
I mean, this comes up in the federal context, right, where Trump could technically tweet the end of an emergency at any time, and then that would put all of us in a bad position. But if we're going on a state declaration, it's a little bit or a lot bit different.
Yeah.
Can I not be lumped in with that analogy, please?
Well, conversely to Hildy's point, I mean, I think, and it's been referenced, some of this is happening county by county. So, you know, I certainly understand you need to tether to some sort of broader declared emergency, but I can also foresee situations in which the Chancellor may need to act in different counties in different ways, given this unique pandemic. One of the things I'm wondering is, because I also in B, I don't think you mean this, but the clause has it kind of broad, which is the emergency authority includes, but is not limited to, the issuance of executive orders for any of the following purposes. I mean, part of me wonders, you know, should there be kind of a more formal resolution by the Chancellor to the President, or something that kind of codifies, you know, the duration as well as the particulars of, you know, what might be contemplated during that time? Like the feds and the governor, I mean, there's actually a written declaration that, you know, kind of specifies, you know, so maybe something can be worked out with the president or the vice president in their absence.
Right. So the Chancellor has, the executive orders that the Chancellor has issued have been pretty specific in terms of the action that he's taking. Is there something, I guess I'm just not quite clear on what more it is you would want.
Well, the broader authority that gives him the ability to do the executive orders. I mean, I think to Hildy's point, it's like, you know, for example, you know, if the governor calls a special session, there is imbued within that special session, these are the areas that we're going to be dealing with. And, you know, Hildy has the point of time, maybe it's kind of more the material actions that are going to happen. I mean, there's the broad kind of authority of, you know, educational continuity. Maybe that's enough. I don't know.
So are you thinking that there should be some action by the board president to trigger the Chancellor's executive authority, and there should be some additional direction from the president to the Chancellor?
I feel like there should just be something in writing between the Chancellor and the board president or the vice president, you know, that kind of has, you know, for lack of a better term, a frame around kind of what the expectation is as far as time and action.
So that is because the emergency actions, now I'm looking under the last line in paragraph B, all of the emergency actions must be approved by the president. So I would expect that the Chancellor would be previewing the emergency action with the president or vice president, and that would be an opportunity for the president to say, well, let's make sure the emergency order says X, Y, Z.
Well, can I ask the president and the vice president to illuminate us on this process and how it's worked so far?
Well, let me just, I mean, I've had to approve, you know, a number of these things, and you know, I think a lot of it depends on the trust you have with your chancellor too. And I don't think it would be a terrible idea, frankly, to have the president and vice president need to approve it, just to add, you know, one more layer of review, and that, you know, that could be done quickly. In terms of it being in writing, that's probably not a terrible idea. I mean, I think we've done it in the past. I think through emails, and I have said I've approved it in email, so there is something in writing. But we could formalize it a little bit more, and but I'd be open to it.
Yeah, I was going to weigh in kind of along those lines as well, Tom. Like, I want to preface this by saying you're right. It's about this policy being in place regardless of who the chancellor is. So it's this chancellor and chancellors we don't even know yet, because I think I really want to compliment the chancellor and his office for their response to the COVID crisis. I think they've done an exemplary job with that. But in terms of a general policy, I'm always a little bit more hesitant to say there shouldn't be layers of some kind of waving of the wand to relegate power. And so, yeah, if it were, I mean, and in the age of Zoom, when it's really easy to probably get a quorum of us together in a real emergency, that seems like it would be a reasonable thing. But if an emergency came up and it requires quick action, at least the president and vice president, something like that, I think would just ensure that there were a few more heads in the game, just to make sure that we were, had good advisement as we made moves.
If I could just weigh in quickly, it certainly has been the practice that I inform both the president and the vice president, and I seek their input. So I don't think that's a major issue. I think, to Member Costa's point, I think, Mark, I think the point was that when an emergency is called, if the chancellor is going to utilize the authority under this regulation, that there's a notification to the board president and the vice president, just letting them know that we're going to exercise the authority, and we're going to exercise the authority under certain conditions. I think that would be fine, just so that there is a record that the chancellor is notifying the board president and vice president. And then the final thing I'll say is that, another important point of this regulation is all of the other actions that were previously taking, expire at a certain date. So we need to ensure that as this crisis continues to expand and continue, we need to ensure that those executive orders have sufficient shelf life so that the colleges can continue to utilize them.
Right, and in terms of you said that you notified the president, but you've actually asked for approval, right? It's not just notification. Okay. And the other thing is, I think we just need to think a little beyond COVID here too, because there can be a state of emergency in one county after an earthquake or a fire or something. Right. And so this could be used there as well. And so we need to think a little bit more broadly than just in the COVID context.
And this is Pam. I would agree with that. We now have 116 colleges, and I realize that some of this language is broad. Continuity of educational services actually needs to be broad, because so many things fall underneath that particular category, and sometimes it may be difficult in how an emergency is addressed. Being too specific may be problematic. But let me just say that for this particular chancellor, and I realize we're not writing it for this particular chancellor, but he has been very, proactive in making certain that both the president and the vice president is aware of situations, and then calls upon both of us to respond in the affirmative or in the negative. So we have been brought into all of those key decision-making processes.
Member Salazar?
I think Pam just clarified, but I just wanted to make sure that it would require board president and vice president approval and not just notification.
Correct.
Requires approval. Currently, a court requires approval of the president or the vice president. We can make that and for second reading.
Okay.
one other just response to the issue of Zoom. So we're only allowed to use these Zoom meetings because the governor has suspended the Bagley-Keene Act under the unique circumstances of this. So it could be that in another circumstance, different emergency, we won't have the Zoom capability to bring the board together so quickly. So
Yeah, well taken. Thank you, Mark.
Yeah.
Okay, is that all the board comments? Okay, so let's have the public hearing. Public hearing on item 4.3, the proposed amendments to California Code of Regulations, Title 5, Section 52020 is now open. The purpose of the hearing is for the Board of Governors to receive comments and testimony from members of the public regarding the proposed regulatory action. At this time, the floor is open for comments from the public.
And just as a reminder, please submit your comments through the Q&A feature of the Zoom platform and include the item number in your submission. You can either identify yourself or specify that you would like to remain anonymous in your comment. Your comment will then be read out loud by a Chancellor's Office staff member. I have received one comment so far through the Q&A, and I will read it now. Good afternoon again. This is Debbie Klein, President of the Faculty Association of California Community Colleges. FAC appreciated the Board of Governors' action to adopt an emergency regulation authorizing the Chancellor to take appropriate actions during the onset of the COVID-19 public health emergency in the spring. However, FAC does not support a change to Title V granting the Chancellor emergency authority that would allow him or her to act outside of the Governor's process that exists to ensure checks and balances. FAC values the role of the entire Board of Governors. Your collective wisdom is more essential during times of emergency. Furthermore, the convening of the board via Zoom is easier and more convenient these days. It is no burden to convene an emergency session of the entire board if necessary. Thank you. And I believe I have two more comments here, and I will read them now. The first comment: during a period of emergency proclaimed by the Governor of the State of California, the Chancellor may assume emergency authority upon a finding made in consultation with the President of the Board. And the next final comment is, why not have the whole board voted on the emergency powers? And those are all the comments that I have through Q&A.
I've received a comment via email. Dr. Ruth Scuderi, retired past president of the California Association of Post-Secondary Education and Disability, and its former legislative committee chairperson. My concerns with the Chancellor's Emergency Authority proposed regulatory addition are in relation to possible unintended impingements to the federal civil rights of students with disabilities. The implementation of these civil rights is a complex issue within post-secondary education. Take one instance: online accessibility for students with quadriplegia, the deaf and hard of hearing, the blind and visually impaired. This is just to name one instance, and 3 of the 10 disabilities served by our California community colleges, and each situation comes with its unique ramifications. Several California community college regulations currently exist to protect the civil rights of students with all disabilities. These regulations are at risk with a quick cursory consultation on waiving, altering, or quickly adding regulations, even with the CCCCO's DSPS unit's quick consultation. The field is too broad and complex for the DSPS unit alone, with its changing staff and experience, to quickly make a determination on a particular proposed regulation's ramifications. Exacerbating this, the proposed Chancellor's Emergency Authority Regulation addition can, in effect, remain a permanent addition even after the declared emergency is ended. See proposed 52020 section C. In conclusion, the proposed item 4.3, the Chancellor's Emergency Authority, can put colleges and the students with disabilities in harm's way if passed as proposed. The gist of the proposal is reasonable. However, the consultation process must be carefully broadened and enough time be given to protect the civil rights of students with disabilities. Also, the proposed permanency 52020C speak to remains of great concern. Thank you.
Are there any additional members of the public who would like to speak on this matter?
I have received an additional public comment. Good afternoon, President Epstein, Vice President Haines, and members of the Board of Governors. My name is Eric Kaljumagi. I am the president of the California College Association, an affiliate of the California Teachers Association. I wish to express my opposition to the proposed 52020A. This proposed section would permit, during a long period of emergency proclaimed by the governor, the chancellor, to assume emergency authority both to establish procedures and suspend regulations. This authority would require only that the chancellor's actions be approved by the president of the board. This change is concerning for several reasons. First, a state of emergency in California is a common situation. Governor Code 8558 declares a state of emergency to be a situation including air pollution, drought, and plant disease that is likely to be beyond the control of a single city or county, and which therefore requires mutual aid. In 2001, Governor Davis declared a state of emergency in response to the state's electrical energy crisis that lasted over 2 years. As far as I can tell, we are still in a state of emergency with regards to the fires of last October, and the current state of emergency over the coronavirus has been in place since 4 March. Adopting Section 52020A as written would grant emergency authority a significant portion of the time. Second, as written, Section 52020A changes the standard procedure from being implemented by a majority vote of the board to being determined by a majority vote of the board. With 16 Board of Governors members as per Ed Code Section 71000, this alters the meaning of a split 8-8 vote from failure to adopt to failure to overrule. Third, adopting Section 52020A as written could project a disconnect between the board and the needs of California and its students during an emergency. I've led 3 different organizations in the past decade, and I've had to call meetings not on the original calendar. While I've also always had ideas on how to handle the situation in question, my boards collectively considered and authorized our group's direction in the fact that extra meetings existed broadcast to our community, our concern for and attention to their interests, board oversight of management, and fundamental good governance. This is, in fact, why boards exist. Last paragraph. The BOG recently held a special meeting itself, so we know it can be done. Delegating authority to a leader in an emergency would be done sparingly and for the minimal necessary duration. Emergency actions do not require the consultation of the members of Consultation Council nor time for public comment. Emergency actions bypass democratic processes, and while that is occasionally necessary, such authority must be granted only when absolutely necessary and for the briefest period possible. The state legislature has shown concern with this regard to over 40 executive orders issued by Governor Newsom, and I encourage the BOG to increase its attention and meeting schedule during emergencies and to grant the Chancellor at most interim 60-day powers. Eric Kaljumagi.
Okay, are there any additional members of the public who would like to speak on this matter?
There have been no additional public comments submitted through Q&A.
Okay, hearing none, this public hearing is closed. This concludes the public hearing on this matter. We'll go back to the board. I believe that Member Fitzgerald has a comment.
Thank you, President Epstein. Just from hearing before the public comments began to flow in, I was thinking about the feasibility of, I heard Member Costa's comments on allowing the Vice President to be looped into the conversation as well in the approval process for these executive actions, these emergency actions, excuse me. And I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on if it's feasible to maybe require that it be approval from the executive committee, which might be maybe more of a compromise instead of just the vice president or president, or if that's not feasible. I'm just curious your thoughts.
Mark, I think we do have an executive committee, do we not? And it's the president, the vice president, and the immediate past president?
Correct.
Is that it?
That's correct.
And if they were to approve it, it would have to be a publicly noticed meeting, is that correct?
That is correct.
So that is, that's an option.
I'm just wondering if that might be more feasible, as a compromise to kind of, because, the executive committee does speak for the Board of Governors in a sense, so it might be kind of a midway point. I don't know, but.
So that the point about it requiring notice is that that would slow down the process. The assumption here is that the chancellor needs to act swiftly to address an emergency. If we were to notice the meeting on regular notice, that would be 10 days, 3 days if we conducted a special meeting. But that would be required of any subcommittee of the board that had 3 members. So that's why the approach would limit it to 2.
Okay, thank you for that, Mark.
Yeah.
Okay, so that is the first reading. We'll go on now. We're gonna get finished. Hopefully everybody can hang in there long enough to finish this item 4.4, and we can start tomorrow morning with the information items. So this is item 4.4 is a first reading and public hearing for proposed amendments to Title V of the California Code of Regulations concerning the procurement of goods and services for community college districts. The Chancellor and the staff will now provide information on this item.
So if you've had too much of me already today, too bad. One more time. So Assembly Bill 2329 from 1998 established authority for the Chancellor to engage in procurement of goods and services on behalf of community college districts. And the legislature instructed us at that time to adopt regulations that would implement this. So that is what we're doing today. We're starting the process of implementing those regulations. It's clear that the legislature anticipated that the Chancellor would be able to exercise market power across the state to secure best prices for community college districts. In practice, the Chancellor has entered into an arrangement with the Foundation for Community Colleges that operates the College Buys program on the Chancellor's behalf. Unfortunately, because there hasn't been a clear linkage between the Chancellor's authority in the Education Code and the College Buys program, there's some confusion within the system about whether they are authorized, whether community college districts are authorized to use this College Buys program in place of local procurement processes, which they are. This regulation will make that clear by formalizing the relationship between the Chancellor and the College Buys program. So the regulation proposes that the Chancellor may delegate this contracting authority to an auxiliary organization, in this case, the Foundation, with expertise and experience in the procurement of goods and services, which the College Buys program has. And so that is the approach. In the board item, we laid out as additional background a number of the things, the important programs that College Buys has operated, the support that it's provided, the system during the COVID-19 pandemic. And I think at that point, I think that's the proposal. It's fairly straightforward. If there are any questions, I would be happy to answer them. And I have Jennifer Keeper from College Buys here as well, if there are any specific questions about the College Buys program, as opposed to the regulation.
Any comments from the board?
So this is Pam. Just to clarify, we were supposed to promulgate regulations in 1998 and just didn't do so. And so this is, in 2020, this is our attempt to rectify that piece of it?
Well, yeah, I mean, yes, it will. It's kind of I mean, I don't know why a regulation wasn't adopted 20 years ago, but none was. When we started having conversations with the Foundation about how to sort of establish that they are and communicate to the districts that they are essentially operating on behalf of the Chancellor's office by contract, which is, there's nothing wrong with that. We looked at the statute and we said, well, actually the statute requires a regulation. So rather than just sending out a guidance or a general counsel's opinion and making it clear that this is authorized, let's just do the regulation. The legislature anticipated that we would do that, so let's do it.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay.
Mark.
Alma, hi.
Hi. To clarify, this is an opt-in option for the college?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, it is. Not mandatory.
Mark, this is Member Grande. I was just wondering, are there any other programs similar to college buys that would benefit from being listed in this proposed regulation rather than limiting it only to the college buys program?
No, this is the only program that that is operating under the Chancellor's authority. And that's what the regulation is about.
Okay, any other questions?
Just a statement. I think it's worth noting that over time, it's saved about $500 million, this program. So particularly in this climate, that's especially noteworthy. So it saved the colleges a lot of money.
Yeah.
Okay, we will now public hearing on item 4.4, proposed regulations to California Code of Regulations, Title V, sections 59130, 59131, and 59132 is now open. The purpose of the hearing is for the Board of Governors to receive comments and testimonies from members of the public regarding the proposed regulatory action. At this time, the floor is open for comments from the public.
And as a reminder, please submit your comments through the Q&A feature of the Zoom platform and include the item number in your submission. You can either identify yourself or specify that you would like to remain anonymous in your comment, and your comment will then be read out loud by a Chancellor's Office staff member. And I have not received any comments on this item through the Q&A at this time.
I've not received any public comments via email at this time.
Are there any additional members of the public who would like to speak on this matter? Hearing none, this public hearing is closed. This concludes the public hearing on this matter. And that, I think, concludes our long day today. Tomorrow we will start with item 5.2, the Classified Employee of the Year Awards, and then go back to 5.1 and go straight through the agenda as is listed on the board docs site.
Just to make sure we don't skip it, we do have one item left on first reading, 4.1, so we can take that up. Oh, we did do it? Okay, perfect. Sorry, my mistake.
I know we've been there, done that. Okay, thank you everyone for the long day. We'll see you bright and early tomorrow.
Okay, thank you.
Have a good day, everyone.